Movies engage two senses, vision and hearing. Sound may be the most creative part of contemporary movie making. Sound can be used as a storytelling element. There are many different sources of film sound and types. In 2001: A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick was very innovative in the film's use of sound. Before talking about Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, we'll have to talk about the types and sources of sound. For sources, you have diegetic, non-diegetic, on-screen sound, and off-screen sound. Diegetic comes from a source within the film's world. There are sounds heard by both the movie's audience and characters. Non-diegetic, however, comes from a source outside that world and is only heard by the audience. On-screen sound emanates from a source that we can see. Off-screen sound derives from a source that we cannot see. While these are the sources, there are also different types of film sound. For types of film sound, there's dialogue, narration, ambient sound, sound effects, and Foley sounds. Dialogue is the speech of characters who are either visible on screen or speaking off screen, say. Dialogue is a function of the plot because it develops out of situations, conflict, and character development. Narration is commentary spoken by either off-screen or on-screen voices and is frequently used in narrative films where it may come from a third-person narrator that is not one of the characters. Ambient sound comes from the ambience or background of the setting or the environment being filmed. Sound effects include all sounds artificially created for the soundtrack that have a definite function in telling the story. The difference with Foley sounds is that there the sound effects are created and recorded in sync with the picture. Today, we'll be talking about sound and the effects sound had on Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, and specifically the scene where Hal kills Frank. When looking at the scene where Hal kills Frank, it's important to look at the types of sound that are used to tell the story that is taking place. In the beginning, all you hear is heavy breathing from the astronaut, which is a diegetic source that comes from the film's world. There's also diegetic sounds that come from the spacecraft itself and Hal. Pretty much throughout this scene, all you're hearing is breathing, which just adds to the intensity of being out in space. As Frank starts to go to do his work in outer space, you clearly see the spacecraft turn around and Hal begin to make his move. But the only way we know that Hal kills Frank is through the sound and the silence that is the sound. We hear an off-screen sound and then complete silence, initiating Frank's death as he goes flying into outer space with nothing but complete silence. This silence can be shown as an ambient sound because it comes from the setting, which is outer space. And now we know that Frank is dead. As this scene continues on, however, there is important dialogue between Hal and the space astronaut.
RG-Pod 3VA, Hal. Made radio contact with him yet?
Dave tries to talk
dead.
to Hal,
positive
but
track
Hal
on it?
doesn't know what happened.
Yes, I have a good track.
Do you know what happened?
I'm sorry, Dave. I don't have enough information.
Open the pod door, Hal.
While Frank is floating in outer space, you also see the spacecraft, which they showed with a bone, and now is also used in contrast with Frank floating through space in complete silence. You get more sounds inside of the spacecraft, But anytime it's showing outer space, there's complete silence. This is a good contrast that is used in the film to show you different settings and how sound affects both. A film we would like to use for comparison to Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey would have to be Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Kubrick really uses both diegetic and non-diegetic sound cues to manipulate and guide the audience. This is shown from the opening scene of the film, in which a slow and eerie music track is projected over shots of Jack Torrance driving up to the Overlook Hotel for his job interview. This part of the score lets audiences know that there is something about the hotel that is not quite right from the beginning of the movie. What is also impressive is the synchronization that is used with the sound design and what's going on in the screen. Throughout the entire movie, the movie's musical tracks and soundtracks match up very closely with the pace of what's happening in the film. When characters are talking, relaxing, or doing anything normal, the music is slow, but when the action builds up, so does the music. This is a great use of sound by Kubrick. It allows sound to tell the story and also add detail to the story. For both 2001: Space Odyssey and The Shining, it's clear that Kubrick's manipulation of sound was very groundbreaking, and it's something that makes The Shining and 2001: A Space Odyssey classics in film, and why Stanley Kubrick is one of the best directors of all time. Kubrick is able to manipulate, scare, and unsettle audience throughout the duration of a movie, and he does this all through sound.